Hello, Colemanators. Ron Coleman, as promised, as threatened. Here's the story. I got Joe Kent with me. I'm going to give you a little picture of what we're talking about. It was yesterday when I wrote that on October 7th. I guess it was Wednesday. YouTube nuked the account of our guy. I'm not going to shove all his titles and appellations down his throat again. He's getting tired of hearing it. Of course, he is running for office. Joe Kent, they took him off. I don't know why. I don't know how they justified it. He always struck me as a kind of a good guy. Of course, I'm a little biased, I'll admit. Joe, how are you? What's going on?
Oh, well, thanks for having me back on.
My pleasure. You were one of my first live streams, and I'm not sure that I'm necessarily all that much better at it now, but this is our first live stream on Rumble, which is
Awesome.
only rolled out live streaming fairly recently.
That's great.
For those of you who are concerned, yes, Ron Coleman's nose is a little bit red, and he is wearing a wrist brace. You should have seen the other guy. We'll leave it at that. Joe, what happened? What happened last week?
I wish I had some great story to tell you, that I had this in particular, like spicy hot take that's going to just wow everybody. But I don't have that. I don't know if I actually penetrated with any kind of great take that got me canceled. I've kind of been pretty consistent talking about breaking up big tech, but the policy-based way that we would break up big tech. I was on Jack Murphy's podcast talking about, or Jack Murphy's live stream actually talking about just that very topic. It was kind of policy-based though, so I'm not sure if that was the particular incident that got me nuked from YouTube. But either way,
But you're on someone else's channel.
I was on someone else's channel, so I don't know what we did on our channel. We usually just use that as like a repository for uploading. Mostly it's just me speaking either at an event or me taking questions at town halls so people can go back and get caught up or whatever. So our channel was actually fairly mild, I thought.
And then just boom, it just disappeared. Any kind of notice?
Yeah, my campaign manager went to upload a video from a previous event the night before, and he asked me, he said, "Hey, what's going on with the channel?" And I opened up my email, and there was the screenshot that I posted that just said, "Hey, I had violated the community standards, and my account had been terminated."
No details. No
details and no warnings. I've heard of the strike system. I'm not really familiar with it. Other people had asked me like, "Hey, did you get a warning or a strike?" And I didn't get anything.
Okay, so your campaign manager tried to contact them.
Yeah,
We've
reached out and we haven't gotten anything back. So
nothing. I mean, that's zero.
Just zero. Yeah, just kind of nuked from YouTube. So like I said in the post, like, oh well, we have Rumble and there's other alternatives right now, thankfully. So it's not a showstopper by any means.
Not a showstopper for you. It's just, there are any number of possible reasons this could have happened. And a glitch is obviously one of them.
Right.
But of course, I'm sure and I know you saw, because you liked the excerpt that I tweeted from our conversation last summer talking about big tech. I guess it's kind of a facile question to ask you, gee, does this make you any more committed to looking into the, big tech monopoly? But on the other hand, if we're having this discussion, we're live streaming it on Rumble, does that in fact make you think maybe it's not monopolistic or undue market control after all?
I mean, I think it's really just a matter of time before they could go after, the serving platform that Rumble and other venues use. Like if they're doing this, they're going through this effort right now to purge us from social media channels. They've gone through it with banking, and there's a bunch of other examples how people have gotten deplatformed or canceled. I mean, the next step is that they do something to Rumble like they did with Parler, where it gets kicked off the server. So I mean, I don't know if this really changed my mind. I guess this just gives me a little bit of personal experience. Like, luckily, I don't make my money off of YouTube like folks who I know do. So, I mean, really, it just solidifies that these guys have entirely too much power. Especially, I'm just a congressional candidate in Washington State, but this is the new public square. I mean, I'm really just a guy. Luckily, I have other platforms, and I've gotten some attention that this didn't really slow me down. But had this happened, 6 months ago, before I had really been able to get my word out there, they kind of would have been able to snuff out my candidacy in the crib, so to speak. And
You
that's
really
just
think so? I mean,
we
would you
don't
really
we
say
don't
it?
want these technocrats to have that much control. This is pretty ridiculous.
Was YouTube that important in the early stage of your campaign?
Yes, it was. Yeah, because it was a way for people to be able to see whatever event that I went to. Like I said, we would upload the questions and answers. People could go back. I could link to it on my other social media. So just to move beyond the whatever it is, 2 minutes and 20-second video you get on Twitter, people could then go to my channel and say, "Hey, who is this guy? I want to hear more about him." So yeah, I think had it happened earlier on, I think it would have been a much bigger deal, especially as far as getting media attention goes. Because I think there's some media folks on our side that are looking through Rumble, but the media writ large is not really combing through Rumble. They're looking at YouTube. So I think earlier on, this definitely would have been an issue.
Right, but so at this point, I mean, is it changing your media strategy though? I mean, because Rumble I've actually found is pretty good in terms
Yeah.
of well, a lot of things. I think there's some things that it can't compare to YouTube with. It's a lot to ask, but what I was pleasantly surprised to find was that they're really doing very well with SEO. And when you consider that Google owns YouTube,
Mhm.
I don't know if perhaps they're bending over backwards to make sure that there's no, you know, sort of corporate favoritism that would open any doors up on, into trust. Are you just shifting Rumble into the position YouTube was at before, or is there been an adjustment?
There's been an adjustment. We're definitely moving all to Rumble right now, and we were kind of heading in that direction anyways because we were wary of something like this happening. And right now, especially as I'm gearing up for a primary, I do think there's a lot of folks that identify as conservative Republicans that are primarily looking at Rumble. The goal now is for us to be able to still generate enough excitement and name recognition on the other platforms so that people that aren't necessarily from the traditional or new right, however you want to look at it, that are just looking at Rumble, that can still get to hear my message. And so, losing that YouTube channel was a hit in that regards. Going into the primary, I don't know how much it matters, but not having a YouTube channel going into a general, I think it sets the other side in a more favorable position because they're reaching a broader audience. And again, that's big tech sticking their thumbs on the scales.
So tell me about the other side. Tell me as much about the primary situation and who's who and who you're up against. And
Yeah. So running as Jamie Herrera Butler, she's a Republican, according to her title, who does not vote that way. So she voted for president. She voted for the impeachment of President Trump. She volunteered to be the Democrat star witness in the sham impeachment trial. Before that, she voted to certify the election on January 6th, despite all the discrepancies and all the issues with that vote. And then she also voted. She has a slurry of really bad votes. Anytime we've needed her to stand up, she's failed. So most noticeably has been the border wall. She voted with the Democrats to stop construction of the border wall. She voted to save Obamacare as Trump was trying to repeal it. She voted for pretty much every iteration of our endless wars that we've had, including leaving our troops in Syria as Trump was trying to get them out, leaving our troops in Afghanistan in the summer of 2020 as Trump was trying to get them out. So every time we need her to stand up, well, also out here in the Northwest, we are victims of the BLM Antifa violence that's plagued Portland and Seattle. We're kind of a suburb of Portland. And as Antifa was marching into our district in the summer of 2020, assaulting our citizens, vandalizing our businesses, Jamie Herrera Butler said nothing until it was time to cross the aisles and vote with the Democrats to stop Trump from being able to deploy the National Guard to quell some of that violence. So on paper, I'm sure you can look up her voting record and she'll get like an 80 something percent. She votes with the R's, and that really just means she votes for tax cuts. She votes for the pork that comes back to the district. But if it's time to take a stand and really defend the hardworking people of the district, like, she folds every single time.
I want to ask you a tricky question instead of all the softballs I've been lobbing at you. A lot of the discourse we see in social media, and I think it's not only in social media, but it's even in meat space and among other human beings, is along the lines of, why even bother fighting elections anymore? They are controlling mail-in ballots, and they are, the other side, they are, essentially making elections meaningless why do we even bother? So you're a smart guy, and you have a little bit of insight into the world of intelligence as well. Why are you bothering? Isn't it really just a foregone conclusion that that's a rhetorical question? I don't think it really is, but I'm not sure why you think it's not.
So I totally understand the frustration, especially out here in Washington State. So Washington State has been doing the 2020 election now for about 15 years, unsolicited mail-out ballots, and even Dominion tabulation machines. So I totally understand the frustration. But what I tell people all the time is that message of like, hey, it's all a rigged system. That is the left, that is the regime. That's their messaging. The two things the regime wants those of us on the right, or those of us who are really just questioning what the establishment wants right now, there's two things they want us to do. They want us to think just that it's all a rigged game, and to stop participating so that they can just run the tables. They don't even want to make it so they have to rig these things, steal it, whatever you want to say. If they can run the psyop that says that this is completely pointless, then they've won. And they also want people to get so frustrated with having their grievances heard through the ballot box that they go and they do something stupid. They act out violently, and that gives the national security state, which we've already seen, is turning its eye towards people in our camp. They're calling the mothers and fathers who attend school board meetings domestic terrorists. We saw what happened with January 6th, the political prisoners with the narrative. There's an entire national security apparatus that wants to focus on us and is searching for targets. So when people get frustrated and say, like, I'm not going to vote, I don't want to hear from candidates anymore. However, I'm still going to stay vocal. I'm going to complain, and maybe I'm going to go protest. And that leads down a very dark path, which I don't want to see on the streets of my country for starters, but it's also playing right into the hands of the regime. If you want to fight the regime right now, you have to do exactly what they don't want you to do. And that's stay incredibly politically activated, show up at every single protest, every single school board meeting, be very intimately familiar
Even protests, even street
are.
protests, Joe, that surprises me, because my general approach has been, in terms, I myself am not a protesting man. Okay, I'm an old Jew. I stay away from. I'm an avid indoorsman. But let's talk about the rest of the normal people in this country. My feeling has been that outdoor protests. It's one thing to welcome Trump to a rally,
Right.
but anything where there's any risk of conflict.
Yeah.
The states, the municipalities, the press are all adverse to our friends and to us.
Yep.
And I think you have to really, really proceed carefully.
Yeah.
When anything where there's a risk of infiltration. Do you believe what I think most people on the right, I didn't say most Republicans, but most people on the right believe now, which is that there's a very, very high degree of infiltration on the right by feds and provocateurs, either working with the feds or others.
Yeah, especially with the January 6th. And again, that ties back into like the left very much wants us to be disgruntled and then work our way into doing something stupid, or really just saying something stupid and putting yourself in one of these. I don't have to tell you, you're a lawyer, putting yourselves into one of these traps where you have an FBI agent or somebody who's just reporting your communications to an FBI agent, and you say something really dumb that can be construed as some sort of criminal conduct. So I definitely think there's infiltrators that we have to be concerned with.
I want to show you a really good tweet by my friend. I don't know if you had the pleasure of meeting him, Matt Couch, responding exactly to that argument. Okay, so Philip D says, no, we're not going to get to 2024 if we don't fix 2020. It'll be a repeat, just like the Gavin Newsom recall. It's hopeless. And Matt, who is a really dynamic guy, and you can find him also on Getter, where he's been really active. Stop saying it doesn't matter. It's not true.
I agree.
And you have to have a little bit of a nuanced appreciation for what the scam of the last election was about. 7 key metropolitan areas. It was brilliant. Because for years, our side has been saying listen. They've been saying it wrongly. It was those of us who've been involved in grassroots election monitoring or any kind of politics have known for a very long time that a very, very large amount of voter fraud takes place in blue states, and especially metropolitan blue states. But the feeling was we're popular enough that our guys will overwhelm it. They sat down and did the math, the other side, and figured out that you can, instead of trying to cheat everywhere all the time, you can cheat. I'm not saying that happened, God forbid. I'm just saying that a person could cheat just focusing on a handful of key districts, which in turn can flip an entire state, which in turn flips the electoral college. That doesn't even, those are real problems, and we need to work on them. And some places the work is happening, some places the work is frustrating. But guys like you need to continue doing what you're doing. Now, if you win the nomination, this challenge to the Republican incumbent, what are your prospects for the general based on either internal polling or based on just your kind of spidey sense of how things go in your district?
They're very strong. I think that the real fight is going to be in the primary. It's going to be myself, America First, versus your traditional well-funded country club Republican in name only Republican. Our district we're R+5 or +6 with redistricting shaking out. We might end up moving up into the R+8 +10 category right now. So the Democrats haven't put forward a serious candidate yet with real DNC backing. And I think with the way the district's looking at, they may just save their money, or they might just throw in someone who's not that serious. But this is a conservative district. People here know what the stakes are. We're right between Portland and Seattle. We've been harmed by the way that the environmental industry is taking away our timber industry, the way that Antifa's marched into different districts. So people know what the stakes are, and I think that the primary is going to be the real fight. I'm not as concerned about the general right now.
So we spoke in June, I think, right? Or was it the beginning of July?
Yeah,
I think
around then. Yeah.
How have things gone for your campaign since then, other than getting kicked off YouTube, which you should be making lemonade out of this. And I'm sure this is at least one drink of lemonade, I hope.
Yeah, it certainly is. No, we've been making some lemonade off of it, and it's a badge of honor of sorts, So things have been going really well. When we spoke, I hadn't received the nomination the endorsement from President Trump yet. So I was endorsed by President Trump, endorsed by General Flynn. Yeah, huge. So obviously that was a great honor, and then maybe want to redouble my commitments every day to just be able to carry the banner of America First from the district. So that was huge. Endorsement from General Flynn, endorsement from the great Paul Gosar, Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz came out and did an event here in the district, a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. So, things have just continued to trend really positively. So we're just trying to keep the momentum and get the word out. That's the biggest hump we have to get over, is really just name recognition for folks that are just living their lives and have their nose to the grindstone. And they know that there's a Republican out there and their name's Jamie Hura Butler, and maybe they haven't been paying attention. We're just trying to get as much name recognition as we can, which ties into the YouTube thing, because that just took away one more venue for us to get that name recognition.
Have you given up on trying to, figure out what went wrong there? What third rail of YouTube sensibility you stepped on, or is it just still something that's still behind the scenes entirely?
We still have some appeals in, and then some patriots have reached out who've been successful in this arena of getting accounts reestablished. And so they've been really nice, and they're helping us out with their time and their skills to try and get an appeal into YouTube. So
I'm glad there are people like that. I'm so glad there are people like that, because people think I'm one of those people because of these things, but lawyers don't do a damn thing. You have to have friends who trust you. I'm not that YouTube doesn't in particularly mistrust Ron Coleman, but you have to have relationships, and you have to know the system. And, I haven't had a lot of luck in certainly with Twitter. I've had very little luck. One of the things that I've been talking about for a little while is this idea that there's, besides there being no accountability for banning people, there isn't even a sense of regularity or predictability as to what or why. And, this idea that, well, if it's a private company, they can screw you over however they want to, is cute.
Right.
But we don't say it in any other area.
Yeah.
Especially in, one of my bugaboos is that I think that this is a matter of consumer law. And I think you and I did discuss this in our
Yeah.
that basically you would not be allowed to say to somebody that you let into your amusement park, we're going to remove you because we don't like the things you're saying. Well, it's an amusement park. Well, that's a place of public accommodation. Well, listen, the only reason that you could possibly make that argument is because of Section 230. Section 230 is a carve out, an exception, and that is now protecting gigantic multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations. Let me ask you, though, along those lines, I actually had tweeted a little thread yesterday about how I was looking at, I'm an alumnus of two universities because I got a college degree and I got a law degree. And one of them is Northwestern, where I went to law school. And I hardly ever have occasion to open up my alumni magazines because they're not about the world that I live in. But I'm glad to say I don't live in the world of brain cancer, and I'd like to keep it that way. But there was an article in the Northwestern magazine about incredible strides that are made in the field of brain cancer, and a lot of that work is being done by people at Northwestern, which is an outstanding university. But almost the entire magazine was identity politics or fundraising. They just ended a campaign and they succeeded at raising $6 billion. And it was like I guess a 5 or 6 year campaign, but that's mind-boggling to me. I mean, now Princeton, I have written about it, the fact that I've stopped giving them money. I was never a big donor to Princeton. I was never a substantial donor to any university, but Princeton's, got tens and tens of billions of dollars in their kitty as well. Have you thought about at all this issue of taking another look at the nonprofit sector, which has become an incredible source of support, both moral and financial and otherwise, for the left and for the Democratic Party in particular? If you were in Congress, would that be something that you would be interested in, in addressing?
Absolutely, because I mean it's a huge way that I think, going back to the 2020 election, a lot of money was moved through nonprofits to do a lot of this election fortification, as they called it. But then in general, the way that a lot of these the tech oligarchs and really the oligarchy on Wall Street, these top 20, 25 billionaires who are already doing a form of really clever tax evasion with the way that they make money off their assets and not their income. But then the way that they'll be able to dump money into nonprofits, and then they're going to get a good tax break from all that. But then those nonprofits are going to go out and act in a very partisan political way while they're scoring points along with this woke ideology that's more than likely being pumped as well through the tech oligarchs. So I think that's a huge part of what we have to do to take on Wall Street, and then really to take on the way that these nonprofits have become their own sort of third rail. I think that's going to be, I think that's going to be really, really key.
I think if it's something that, and the political resistance to that is going to be extraordinary, because I mean, I don't think it's going to be the fact that people have this great loyalty to Harvard Law School where they all went. I'm bitter. Okay, I'm bitter. I wouldn't have applied to Harvard Law School because I knew I wasn't going to get it. My mother made me. Okay. And at that age, you don't have to listen to what your mother tells you, okay? But on the other hand, sometimes, it was her $50, okay? That's what it cost in those days. I did just fine at Northwestern. But it's something I do think that if more people who aren't plugged into those elite networks really knew, because it's a little bit hard to get across, but if they knew how much money these guys are sitting on, and it's ironic how big they are and how big the politics they like are on redistribution, but not on redistribution of their assets, redistribution of productive assets. Now, a lot of, again, productive schools like Northwestern and Princeton and, the Stanford and MIT, they do a lot of science and they add a lot of value to the economy. They own a lot of patents. in many respects, they act a lot like for-profit organizations, not the way we think of as, a school, merely a school. These are research institutes. These are, you know, these are really influential and powerful organizations that are completely outside the taxing power of, what otherwise, and the executives, what we otherwise would see as executives. Presidents of these schools make, and sports coaches in some of these schools, they make seven figures of money.
Yeah, and the settlement law too, I think is huge too, because there's so many judges out there who, when these corporations get taken to court and they have to pay out a settlement, some of the agreement will be that they give money to charity organizations or they put it back into some of these universities. Coincidentally, like you said, it's universities that they all went to, and it just becomes this massive slush fund, another way to transfer wealth that should otherwise be in the economy, either in the form of taxes, or it shouldn't be this massive slush fund that they're all using. Like the case of the little statue of the little girl in front of the Wall Street Bull, like where they got sued for all the discriminatory practices against women, but as opposed to playing out to the plaintiffs, the agreement was that they were going to do some sort of woke tribute to women in the workplace, and they built this statue, but they really shorted all the women that were actually aggrieved. I think I'm sort of getting that right. I read about it a little while ago, but there's multiple incidents like this where where woke incorporated, the combination of nonprofits, the oligarchy, and then a lot of folks on the judiciary who've gotten put into these different positions are okay with settlements being made this way. It's just, there's so many different ways right now for our elites to really make money and then distribute money on the backs of the deplorables. That's just a completely rigged system. So I think going after the permanent ruling class on every level, but in particular Wall Street, is something we have to do.
Listening to you for the last half hour, having spoken to you for 45 minutes or so earlier in the spring, early summer, I'm looking for the crazy. I'm looking for what it is. Somebody who, I understand that we're viewed deplorables as
Mm-hmm.
People who have the point of view. I can't imagine you and I disagree on too many issues. What do you think? If you were a Democrat running against Joe Kent, what would be the position that you take? That's like, have you and this to me is also part of the YouTube calculus. Did you suggest anything screwy about vaccines, of the sacrament of our church of high government?
Yeah, I've expressed skepticism about the vaccines, but I think it's all fairly, I don't know. I don't think I have a unique take on the vaccines other than like, hey, why are they pushing these things so heavily? And maybe people shouldn't be mandated as to which vaccines they get. I'm pretty strong on that. I don't think the government should be able to compel you to take a vaccine. And most certainly the president of the United States shouldn't be pressuring private entities to pressure their employees to take vaccines. I believe it's a means of control. I guess that's maybe the craziest take that I have, that, hey, if you want to control a populace, you need that one piece of data that says, will you or will you not submit? And the vaccine gives a really good binary data point to put right in people's face and say, yes or no, are you going to do it? And then from there, the government gets really critical data as to who will comply and who won't. That seems to me to be the direction this is heading. So I guess that's
okay. Well, you know what? Your crazy take is very, very fascinating, because it's an intriguing point that you point out, that all the litmus tests, there are always all these litmus tests, and the thing, whatever the thing is. I just saw recently another good name for it, the medical corporate establishment, something like that. Whatever the thing is, has lighted upon this idea that health. Are you anti-health? Are you pro-death?
Right.
And how can you argue with that, right?
Yeah.
There is and that's why messaging is so important, and that's why having the media carrying water for you is so important, because they frame the issues for still so many people. Now,
Yes.
You're on the campaign trail, you're meeting people all the time. How many, would you say that would you agree with me? Because I think it is the case that the corporate media is essentially preaching to its own choir at this point. They're not changing any minds.
Yeah. I think they're just speaking to blue checks on Twitter and hoping that because they have control of like the media environment, that it will eventually saturate and penetrate in the way that it used to. I think they've gotten ahead of their skis. I think 10 years ago, that was definitely the case where they ran the tables between the newspapers and then what was out
Gotten
there
ahead
on
of
the
their
internet.
skis. Is that a falling on your face reference? Is that what you're talking about? Because if I had fallen in the snow, I don't know. My thing about skiing, Joe, is I figured you're already at the bottom before you start skiing. And then you go all the way up to the top. You were at the bottom before. Why do you have to go and take all that risk just to get back to the bottom? Maybe that's just how an avid indoorsman sees things. So you think you actually think that they're a little bit, and it's a great metaphor because I get the idea of that they're losing kind of control of the momentum that they themselves have built up.
And that's why I think they're so desperate right now for actual control, because they're not trying to win or even take control of the information idea space, because that's moving too fast right now. Like, you kill YouTube, we got Rumble. This is more dynamic, and people are really starting to see through some of the lies, especially when we have this pandemic that was supposed to scare everybody. We caught Fauci in lie after lie after lie. What's going on with the schools? And then now these mandates where people are walking out, losing their jobs. So I think a lot of their narrative is really collapsing on itself, but that's why we see them moving so heavily towards control. And so I think that we're doing well in the information space. That's why I think that's why I heavily advocate people continuing to stay engaged. Don't take the bait, don't take the black pill, stay active in this, because that's what the other side doesn't want. That's why they're moving so heavily towards actual physical control. That kind of buys back into how I feel about the vaccine. Right now, the regime just wants to know, like, is this guy going to be a problem or is he not? Like, will you take the vaccine or will you not? Like, we're kind of back to like way more raw power politics, which I think is pretty frightening in the United States of America. I hate to say that we're at that point because I've seen that overseas, but that's where things are. But I believe that they're ahead of their skis with the narrative and with control of the information flow.
I think you're right. And I think you also bring up a couple of really great points. One of them is, you mentioned the school boards. People are beginning to see not only that they've perhaps been lied to or misled by the press for a very long time, but what's been going on in these school boards?
Yeah.
How are they spending our money? What are they teaching our kids? Who's making these decisions?
Right. Yeah. And
then doctors, the medical establishment, one thing I realized for a long time was that people kept saying, well, ask your doctor, ask your doctor. I love my doctor. My doctor has been a personal friend of mine since we were in summer camp together in the early 70s. Okay, I mean, and he's a great doctor. But what I see about doctors such as he, is that they're not really drilling down on these questions as a general rule. They're following a consensus, or at least a consensus of institutions, and they're not necessarily the best source of information about whether or not. I mean, I went to a dermatologist who told me that I should get vaccinated. I didn't ask him. And certainly, if anyone's going to complain about Rand Paul merely being an ophthalmologist, cross-examining Dr. Fauci, I think dermatologists can also.
What's that guy now? Yeah.
He might. No, he knows more than me, and he knows more than you.
Yeah.
But is he applying his tools as a physician to really inquire? Because the silence on this issue, and this is something we talk about all the time in our house because it is a very intense, policy-oriented household. The silence and diversion around the issue of natural immunity is mind-boggling. Why aren't all the doctors in the world who learned this most basic tenet of what a vaccination is and what immunity means? Why aren't we hearing from all of them as opposed to merely some of them? And some of them we do hear from are the ones getting kicked off.
No, because the control of the narrative, they've just said, hey, if you're against what we're saying, then you're definitely gonna be labeled a bad doctor, but probably even a bad person because you just don't care. They've taken the science completely and totally out of it and gone with this whole control, bow down to the regime. But I think in general, Americans are seeing institutions crumble in a way that we haven't seen prior to the current time that we're in right now. So me, like serving 20 plus years in the military, I remember early phases of the Iraq War, and I was like a true believer. And I thought, surely somebody knows. This seems like it's really messed up right now, but there's somebody at the Pentagon who's like a general who's way smarter than little old me, who's got a plan. And it's all going to make sense at some point. And I think you can, and obviously we all know the way that played out.
What kind of moments are you talking about? Like, what kind of experiences was it that made you have that internal dialogue?
Yeah, so I was actually over in Iraq when we demobilized the Ba'ath Party, and we basically told all of them they were fired. So Ba'ath Party is the guys that work for Saddam, which was everybody in Iraq who knew how to run civil society, the security forces, take out the trash, turn on the lights, you name it. They were all in the Ba'ath Party. That was like Iraq 101 that I knew very well. And I was one of the groups that was putting as a Green Beret our jobs to train foreign forces. So I was working, we were starting the Iraqi army. And so we had just gotten all these former anti-Saddam militias, and some of them had actually been in the Ba'ath Party as part of the resistance. And then the guys sitting in Baghdad, the generals and the notorious Paul Bremer said, hey, we're going to issue this order. They called it Coalitional Provisional Authority Order Number 1. And that basically fired everybody in the Ba'ath Party. It fired like 90% of the Sunnis in the country. And that was really bad advice they got from one dissident group in particular. So me at the ground level, dealing with Iraqis every day, going out either fighting or having to train, I was like, this is terrible. And I was like an E5, a sergeant Green Beret, but I was like, yeah, but I'm just a sergeant Green Beret, man. Like, I'm just going to do my job. I'm going to train these guys. There's someone who knows better. And then, but I did realize at the time, no one came and asked us, the guys that were on the ground, hey, what do you guys think about this? What are you seeing? Because no one at the time was more deep in I'd say the Iraqi populace than the frontline soldiers, in particular, special forces guys. Nobody came and asked us. Nobody came and asked my immediate supervisor, who was like a captain.
And you don't mean, you're not,
and,
when you say asked us, you don't mean chain of command should have been turned on its head. You're saying, do you want human intelligence? Exactly. You want to understand. So, because this was a problem that, talk about, this was the dispute between Eisenhower and Patton. Mm-hmm. Patton says, you're telling me to fire everyone who knows how to turn on a water main, because any high official in any German town. That's right. And Eisenhower says, look, he didn't say it, but the message that came clear was denazification is simply the priority. And I really don't care, frankly, after what Germany has done starting this war, if they have to go through some hard times for a while without some of their talent, because Nazis are simply not acceptable. Now, that was a clear political and policy choice that was made and arguably had to be made. Patton didn't get it, and he ended up having to find something else to do with himself. On the other hand, the Ba'ath Party is a much more subtle issue. It's not like being a Nazi. I mean, one thing we found about the Middle East and in Asia Minor is that today's militia head that you're supplying arms to is tomorrow's Al-Qaeda.
Right.
It's a lot of moving parts. Maybe they should be listening a little bit more to the rank and file.
Yeah, no, that was exactly it. And that was in subsequent tours as the war went on, I just realized that the establishment wasn't listening. They had their agenda that was clear cut, more troops, more resources, just to keep this whole thing going, this narrative that we'd built this Iraqi government. And really what we said at the bottom didn't matter. And so for me, that was watching that institution really, really collapse and I guess just disappoint me.
Well, we've got a guy like General Milley in charge, right? So, I mean, now at least we know that here's a guy who's in touch with the rank and file like no one ever before, right?
Yeah, all the way from, whatever great woke issues going on, all the way to what the generals at the PLA in China want to hear. So, I mean, Milley's a classic example of just a political general. He knew what the agenda was. Biden came in, he said, day one, I want to know who's against me. So start pumping the CRT, have this extremist stand down.
Day one, was
like, I'm all in.
I think day minus 30. He's already calling people up. He's sitting, but what the hell is he doing? Even talking to Nancy Pelosi. I understand there are members of Congress there are legitimate channels, but this is craziness. But listen, what do I know? Joe, great to have you on. You're the first person ever to appear twice on the Coleman Nation podcast. That definitely makes up for getting banned from YouTube, but I hope that you do
Absolutely.
get back onto YouTube as soon as possible. And when you do, we'll be trumpeting the news, and I won't make you come on and explain it again. I'm sure it's a glitch.
I'm sure it's just a mistake, just a clerical error.
It just the kind that only happened to Republicans.
Right.
Best of luck. Everybody support Joe Kent. He's the man. Good talking to you.
Yep.
Take care.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.